first year at her firm, they make $180,000 or $210,000 a year. Unless you really, really want to do it, most people who go into law end up unhappy.
A degree in philosophy from Carnegie Mellon University, with both parents working as lawyers, his mother still a law firm partner, might make it seem like Nat Eliason was destined for a traditional, financially secure path.
And I convinced the school to give me almost a year's worth of credits just to work on my startup. Humans derive an incredible amount of self-satisfaction and life satisfaction from work, from doing things.
But even during college, Nat was already exploring the startup world, and it didn't take long for him to realize that the conventional route wasn't for him. After a brief stint in a traditional internship, he broke away and started building a life on his own terms. He founded Growth Machine, a hugely successful SEO agency, but eventually stepped away from it all.
Because whenever you're unsure what to do in a situation, you can just ask yourself what you would tell your kid to do. Building up savings, doing something, and then using those savings to fund the next leg of my career. Yeah, those 3 or 4 or 5 years while you play catch up are probably going to suck, are probably going to be really, really tough emotionally. But if you really stick with it, if you're diligent about using your runway and really fully committing to making this work, you can hit that escape velocity from, and it's all about this idea that you should expect it to take 1,000 days.
He's since navigated the highs and lows of the crypto world, making and losing millions, and launched his book, Crypto Confidential.
Your own book, it's so engaging. You should make it into a movie or something.
Thank you.
Now, Nat is focused on his true passion, writing and focusing on how to spend more time with the relationships that matter to him most in life.
I think I'd want them to say that he worked extremely hard, but we were clearly the priority. You hear a lot of that. You don't hear as much people saying, I wish I spent more time on work.
Work extremely hard, prioritize family, get into the work.
Unless you really, really want to do it, most people who go into law end up unhappy.
A degree in philosophy from Carnegie Mellon University, with both parents working as lawyers, his mother still a law firm partner, might make it seem like Nat Eliason was destined for a traditional, financially secure path.
First year at her firm, they make $180,000 or $210,000 a year. And I convinced the school to give me almost a year's worth of credits just to work on my startup. Humans derive an incredible amount of self-satisfaction and life satisfaction from work, from doing things.
But even during college, Nat was already exploring the startup world, and it didn't take long for him to realize that the conventional route wasn't for him. After a brief stint in a traditional internship, he broke away and started building a life on his own terms. He founded Growth Machine, a hugely successful SEO agency, but eventually stepped away from it all.
Because whenever you're unsure what to do in a situation, you can just ask yourself what you would tell your kid to do. Building up savings, doing something, and then using those savings to fund the next leg of my career. Yeah, those 3 or 4 or 5 years while you play catch up are probably going to suck, are probably going to be really, really tough emotionally. But if you really stick with it, if you're diligent about using your runway and really fully committing to making this work, you can hit that escape velocity from, and it's all about this idea that you should expect it to take 1,000 days.
He's since navigated the highs and lows of the crypto world, making and losing millions, and launched his book, Crypto Confidential.
Your own book, it's so engaging. You should make it into a movie or something.
Thank you.
Now, Nat is focused on his true passion, writing and focusing on how to spend more time with the relationships that matter to him most in life.
I think I'd want them to say that he worked extremely hard, but we were clearly the priority. You hear a lot of that. You don't hear as much people saying, I wish I spent more time on work.
Work extremely hard, prioritize family, get into the work. Hi, Nat.
Hey, Lydia. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to be on the show. I'm so excited today because you are my second guest that I have this back-to-back recording. And I first learned about you on Ali's deep dive when you talked about a lot of things. And I found that somebody for this podcast, because it's called Escape 9 to 5. I always wanted to interview people who have a very interesting trajectory in their career and in life. And you fit perfectly into that persona. And also, I interview your friend Paul.
Paul? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the latest I have out there. And he encouraged me to reach out to people. I was like,
Yeah, we should give Paul a quick shout out because his book just launched last week.
Oh, yes, The Good Work. It's a really good book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got an advanced copy of that. I really enjoyed reading it. So Nat, you just launched your own book. I'm in the midst of trying to finish it. Like I'm 50% in. It's so engaging. You should make it into a movie or something.
Thank you. I hope it happens. I hope that happens. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, there will be a movie deal for sure. And then you have a traditional trajectory because you did your undergraduate in Carnegie Mellon University. CMU University. Yeah. I listened to your podcast with Ali. You mentioned that you did this internship in this big firm. I don't know what that firm is, but you pretty soon that you didn't want to be there and then you crafted your own life. So maybe you can give us a little bit of introduction there. And we also have opening tradition, which is you share 2 truths and a lie, Escape 9 to 5 version with us. So I can guess which one is the lie.
Oh, okay. I ended up studying philosophy in college, but the other 3 career paths I was considering going into college were business, physics, and theater.
Yeah, that's one.
No, that's all 3. One of those is the lie.
Oh, physics, theater, and business. I think it's business.
No, I actually went to college originally as a business major and switched to philosophy after the first year. Yeah. And physics was the other thing I was seriously considering. And I'd actually been very into theater in high school up until like my junior year, and then kind of lost interest in it when I got more interested in like business and science. So,
interesting. Because I thought you're a very creative person. I'm reading your book. You're very good at telling the story. And I know a little bit of your background. You started is it like a marketing agency as SEO specialist?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, theater might be true.
I was definitely interested in theater for a while and then just kind of fell out of it.
Maybe you can give us a little bit of intro of yourself for people who doesn't know you that well, your career trajectory from the beginning till now.
Totally. So my name's Nat. I'm a writer, author. I have been kind of in the online entrepreneur creator space for about a decade now, though. I started doing content marketing and SEO work. I worked with a few companies doing that, started a marketing agency that I ran from 2016 through 2020, and then stepped out of that. Was going to go all in on writing then, but got sidetracked by crypto stuff and getting super deep into the crypto world and learning programming and actually like building crypto tokens and apps and stuff and getting super deep into that world. And then left crypto in 22 and have just been all in on writing since then. My first book, Crypto Confidential, come out earlier this year in July. So about 3 months ago now. I'm now working on the next books. So that's my main work at this point.
Great. I love the career trajectory. You basically crafted the whole thing for yourself. I really wanted to go back to the very beginning because I think we go through this kind of like internship and you work in a big firm and then you forget about your dreams and inspiration. What was the moment that you were interning in that place that you realized this is not for you?
So I went into college as a business major and I was in a business fraternity and I was getting a lot of exposure to the normal like business path, at least in the US, which is typically you go into finance or consulting. So you either go work at like a Wall Street bank, investment firm, something like that, or you go work as like a management consultant. I know this was Paul's path originally. So I was looking at those 2 paths and consulting was a little bit more appealing to me. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go try doing this internship. And I did the internship and the work just didn't feel like we were doing anything very useful. And I think that that's sort of the running joke with like consulting, with a lot of consulting, is that they're, these kind of like expensive empty suits who, help you justify decisions you already want to make, right? It's sort of an odd career. It wasn't very fulfilling at all when I was doing it. And then I was asking older people who had graduated from college a few years ago, who were now working in it, who were 4, 5, 6 years ahead of me and were in the position I thought I wanted to be in. And I asked them about their job. And when they talked about what they liked, they never talked about the work. They talked about the other things. They talked about how many airline points they were getting and the nice apartment they could afford in New York and like all these other things. But if you ask them about the actual work, it was usually this kind of like negative
Yeah.
connotation, this negative attitude towards it. And I think a lot of people do need to do a job you don't want to do because you need to like make money, right? You need to feed yourself, especially if you have kids or a partner, you know, you have a lot of debt or you have to take care of your parents, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing a job to pay the bills, right? I mean, that's what survival is based on, right? It's not like if we were living in pre-modernity, food just like appeared in front of you. You had to go get it, right? You had to do work to live, right? That makes a lot of sense. But if you're a 22-year-old without debt, without parents you need to take care of or siblings, you know, in this incredibly lucky position, there's literally no easier life situation you could possibly be in, right? Especially if you like live in America. If you're like in the US, you don't have debt, you don't have children, you don't have people you need to take care of, you don't have some debilitating illness. It's like you have the easiest life of any human in all of recorded history. Like probably even easier than, you know, kings and queens from a couple hundred years ago.
Yes.
So the idea that you need to play it safe and take this very risk averse stance is like pretty absurd. It's almost cowardly. What more could you possibly need to feel like you can take a little bit of risk? And so I kind of got in my head that like, okay, well, I want to at least try to do work that I enjoy doing that can also pay the bills. And so if I'm going to try to do that, there's probably no better time than right now, because I was already starting to see it where people were in these finance or consulting jobs and they couldn't leave them because they'd gotten used to 200K salary or the nice apartment, or they were only hanging out with people who were making that much money. And so then they wouldn't be able to afford to hang out with them anymore, right? Like they would lose their friend group if they gave that job up. And so the golden handcuffs get you really quickly. And the thing I was fortunate with is that both my parents were lawyers. Neither of them recommended becoming a lawyer. They did it because they needed to make money, like, and they wanted to make money. But they both said, like, you know, unless you really, really want to do it, like most people who go into law end up unhappy because you have the worst of both worlds. You have this highly specialized skill set that does not easily transfer to other careers, but you get paid very well for using that skill set. My mom's she's still a partner at her law firm. And when a new associate comes in, so this is like a 24-year-old, when they come in as a first year at her firm, I think they make like $180,000 or $210,000 a year. So that's a lot of money. And you can't really do anything else with a law degree. So you're stuck in that life unless you're willing to really like give all of it up. So I said, okay, well, let's not get myself trapped in a certain life. I'll try to do this other stuff. And if I fail, I can always go get a job later, right? I can always go do something I don't want to do to pay the bills later. Like that option is never going away. But the option to, you know, take a flyer on yourself and try to make a job for yourself, that option only gets harder probably until you're in your 50s or 60s, and then it gets easier again because, you know, kids are out of the house and whatever.
Yeah.
So do it before you have all the obligations. It does not get easier later. As somebody who now has children, I can guarantee you it is way easier to go after this stuff earlier than later. And so I switched out of the business degree. I was like, this is useless. I'm going to study philosophy because I enjoyed philosophy and it was the major with the lowest requirements. The business major, there were something like 30 required classes you had to take. So you had no real freedom in what you studied. And a lot of them were pretty hard. They were pretty demanding courses. The philosophy major had 12. So it was 1/3 of the required courses. And then the rest, you could take whatever you wanted. So I took psychology classes. I took a fiction writing class. I took a course on human computer interaction. I took, extra philosophy classes that I was just interested in. And I took a year off of school to do a startup. And I convinced the school to give me almost a year's worth of credits just to work on my startup. So I basically got to like hack the college system, in that I still got my degree, but I really only went for 3 years and like bullshitted through half of it. So, that gave me a lot of freedom. And so by the time I graduated, I'd started developing some of these skills where I was one of the only people I knew who, in my senior spring, there were a couple of companies that were trying to hire me, that were like giving me offers without me doing the like job fair, applying, reaching out, trying to get hired. It was this completely different relationship with work than most of my peers were going through. It
Yeah.
was a really powerful demonstration of like, oh, if you like actually get good at things, like, skills instead of just getting grades, you become very valuable, and it gives you a lot more options for what you do. And I thought I was going to go straight into entrepreneurship, but I got a cool job opportunity, went and did that for a year instead, and then basically worked for myself ever since then.
Yeah. Rest is history. I think what you're sharing is super valuable because not many people, especially people from my background, so I'm Asian, and like my cousin, he's studying at NYU. He was talking to me about the startup idea he has with some of his friends. I was
Yeah.
like, why don't you just take a year off? He's like, I can't. I was like, why? He couldn't even, like, even to me, the worst case scenario, which is he failed, is not too bad. He could just come back to NYU to continue
Yeah.
the study, which is here what you said, like you basically convince a great university to give you a full year of credit. I think that's something that people need to hear. Like that's
Yeah.
why I have these kind of conversations, because it's not out there, because each one of these kind of stories is so individual, like you cannot replicate. But
Yeah.
I think it takes time, and also takes the fear away for people who are craving for stability, especially if you're a top university student. Your whole life is a straight A, and up to some point you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm copying everyone else. Your story, you have the benefit of looking 30 years later, because you have your parents to show you
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really a route that you want to follow. Otherwise, people are just following whoever their peers are doing. I loved when you say in Ali's podcast, you says that it sucks to try something and fail, but sometimes it sucks more to try the wrong thing and have it succeed.
Yeah, yeah. That's how you get trapped. I mean, that's how a lot of people get trapped.
Yeah.
And it happens in very unexpected ways too. I mean, one, this certainly is sort of what happened to me with crypto, was I got into it in this like fun and light way, and then it went, so much better and in such a wild direction that I never could have expected, that I very quickly forgot why I started doing it in the first place, which was to make a bit of money so I could get back to writing. And pretty quickly, it was the only thing that matters is making more money in crypto. Completely lost sight of that. But you see it in smaller ways too. Like, it's especially challenging in the creator economy, so to speak, where people will start doing a creator type business, and then they're making a YouTube channel about something they're really passionate about, and then it takes off and it starts to do really, really well, and they're getting all these views and they're starting to make money from it. And so then they hire people to like grow their YouTube business, and now they're like really fixated on the algorithm. So now they're not making stuff entirely based on what they're interested in. It's a mix of like what I want and what the algorithm wants, and then it's more on the algo side. And then it's, well, I can't not make a video this week because I have to make money to keep paying my team. And so now I've like accidentally created a job that I no longer like, and now I can't quit it because I have employees, and I don't want to like wipe out 10 people's jobs, right? I mean, that's a scary position to be in, and that's sort of what ended up happening to me with the marketing agency, where I really enjoyed doing SEO. I really enjoyed doing content marketing, and I was very good at it. Like I had really cracked the Google algorithm for the 5-6 years that I was active in it. And I built a pretty big name in the space during that period. But then it eventually got to a point where I just didn't enjoy doing it anymore. I wanted to work on other things. I wanted to write other things, but I couldn't because I had employees. I had a duty to them. I needed to like take care of them as well, take care of the business for them, right? When you have people's health insurance and mortgage and things like that relying on you, you're not really fully in control of your work anymore. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's not entirely a bad thing. It's kind of a really incredible gift to have too. When an employee has a baby and then gets to take maternity leave, and that maternity leave is paid for by a business that you built, like sitting in a Starbucks in Manhattan, that's fucking awesome. And it adds this whole other layer to it that you don't think of when you get into it. You don't think of when you hire the first employee. And so you've really kind of like got to be careful of what you commit yourself to. And you've got to think like, what if this succeeds, right? Everyone focuses on what if it fails. But what if it succeeds in a massive way? Like, do you want that life?
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of the successful entrepreneur type, like the very early founders, are not necessarily fit into the second, third stage of the growth. It applies to life in general. Like, do you remember any of the pivotal moments that you decide to transition from your growth machine, that company, to writing and also crypto, now full time on writing?
It's hard to say what the specific moment was with Growth Machine. There was a point when it switched from doing it for fun to doing it to keep the business growing and to growing the business. And I generally enjoyed it. Growth Machine is still running. Like, it's still a great company. They're still doing SEO work. You know, if people need SEO help, like, you can still go hire them. Like, it's
Yeah.
off on its own now, which is really cool to see. And but I don't know when I decided I wanted to try something else, honestly. Like, I think it just hit a point where I started thinking about another 5 years of working on the agency and realized that just wasn't the kind of business I wanted to build, or the business that I wanted to focus on, or the skill set I wanted to develop. I think that was the big thing, was the question I continually ask myself is, like, what skill am I getting better at? And is it a skill that I would enjoy continuing to get better at for 10, 20, 30 years? And managing is not one of those skills. It's a very important skill. I'm not dishing on managing. Like, it's a very, very useful skill to develop, but it's not one that I care about at all. And, you know, that was kind of one that I had to like start thinking about. There's also this realization of, oh, I don't actually want to grow a business. I don't want to hire a bunch of employees. I want to have something super, super lean and super light. And yeah, it'll probably never sell for $100 million, but that kind of doesn't matter, because you know, I was fortunate very early on to get a little bit of a taste of the like 4-hour work week, passive income, you know, life. I built this app and I had my blog, and it was making a few $1,000s a month, enough that I could go live in Argentina and like not work for a few months. And I just got bored and sad really quickly and wanted to work on something again. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I think that humans derive an incredible amount of self-satisfaction and life satisfaction from work, from doing things. And it's a really important part of identity, contribution. I think there's something very biological about it. You know, we're all part of this species, this like superorganism. And if you're not advancing the species in some way, I think there are like little biological cues that tell you like, hey, you know, you're actually kind of like detracting from the species. You're not advancing it, right? Like, that's part of why I think having children is so fulfilling. It's why like building community is so fulfilling, and it's why work is so fulfilling. And so you kind of need to find the work that you could do every day very happily for a very, very, you know, until you die, ideally, that can also pay the bills. And second to that is work that you don't enjoy that much, but that can pay the bills. And I think third to that is not working. I think it's actually better to have a job that you're not incredibly enthusiastic about, but that is like doing something for other people, than it is to be not working. Because people who are not working, they just like don't do well. Like, it's really bad for you psychologically.
Yeah, they lost the purpose of like living. In a
Yeah.
way, like life itself is never ending problem solving. I
Yeah.
think of
Yeah.
it that way. I'm really interested in your trip. You mentioned you did backpacking trip with your wife
Yeah.
a long time ago. Do you think that that trip actually changed some perceptions about life? And do you remember any of the key moments, like the best and worst memories of that trip?
The thing that trip was scratching at, that it solidified as a very strong idea, and something I want to do a book on eventually, I just haven't figured out the right packaging for it, but is that you should really either fully commit to things or quit them like as soon as possible. You don't
Yeah.
want to get stuck in a gray area. You don't want to get stuck in like option seeking, in you know, like, you know, increasing the number of things you could go do. And it's a very tempting thing to do today, because you think, oh, I could have any job, I could date any person, I could live anywhere, I could do anything. And yes, but you can't do all of them. And you're going to have to pick something eventually. You're going to have to pick a partner eventually, because you're going to run out of time to have kids. You're going to get sick of being lonely, right? Or, you're going to have to pick a job eventually, because your costs are going to increase. You're going to need to make money. You're going to have to pick a city eventually, again, because of like kids and, building. So you kind of have two options. You either make that choice very deliberately earlier on before you feel ready for it, because you never feel ready for any of these things, or you put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off, and then you just sort of like desperately grab at the thing closest to you when you feel like you're running out of time. And I mean, especially with the relationships, I think that's what happens to a lot of people. They get to this age, like mid 30s, late 30s, and they go like, holy shit, I'm out of time. Like, okay, well, we're dating, so let's get married and have a kid. And that often doesn't go well. It would probably be way better to, be in your 20s or something and say, you might be who I want to marry. And so let's stress test this very quickly and very deliberately, and not delay figuring out if this is the relationship that we want to commit to or not. And so with my wife and I, we had been dating on and off for 2 years. She was still in college. I'd graduated. And so we would start dating and then stop dating and start and stop. And she graduated, and we basically said, okay, we can't do this anymore. This isn't healthy. Like, all of our friends were telling us that you got to stop doing this. Like, this is fucked up. But we were like, well, there still might be something here. And so we said, okay, let's go on this backpacking trip. Let's go to Asia, and we're going to stay in hostels. We're only going to have what's on our backs. We're going to be like uncomfortable and sweaty and gross and unable to escape each other. And we will either break up or we will come back and move in together. There's no other option for this trip. Those are the two outcomes that we will accept. And we were very like upfront about that with each other. We were like, this is why we're going on this trip. We either move in together and actually make this work, or we break up and say like, that's the end of it. Like, a couple weeks into the trip, we both realized like, okay, no, we're committing to this. Like, let's do it. And then we got back from the trip and moved in together and got a dog 6 months later and got married 18 months after that and had a kid a year and a half after that, right? Like, we're like, okay, no, we're committing to this. Like, we're doing this, we're figuring it out, and the relationship is perfect. But you pick somebody to commit to and keep reinvesting in, and then you build that relationship together. And I think there's just so much to be said for that mentality towards these questions. And I've been trying to do it more with work. We did it with where we live, just being like, we're not going to think about other cities anymore. Like, we are making Austin work. Like, this is our home, and we are going to invest in our home. Because I think that the other mentality a lot of people have is, I need to look for the thing that already works. And you'll never find the thing that works. You'll never find the person who's perfect for you, or the place is perfect for you, or the job that's perfect for you. You create that relationship by committing to it and investing in it, and accepting that there are hard parts of any choice you make, but you push through them and you slowly make it better and better over time. And on a 5, 10, 20-year timeline, that pays off in these really beautiful and magical ways.
Yeah, I think one thing I picked up from your story, both in Korea and also in finding a partner, is you're creating something for yourself. Yeah. And you pick someone who's, you and your wife Cosette, you went to Asia, you have this unique memory that only the two of you have.
Yeah.
So it's not many couples that can replicate, but maybe they can do something similar to that. They have this unique memory, and then they have experienced so much together in difficult times, and that's why we can stick together. Even like, we can talk about now, when I read Crypto Confidential, I'm just like 5 chapters in, I can see there's a lot of ups and downs even in your mental, but you always have your wife next to you. And because I know this background of your backpacking, I was like, this is going to be fine. Like, it's so, it's so good to have someone with you, and when you're doing something that's seemingly high risk, but you also have a responsibility, right? You talk about family and kids. How do you manage the temptation of high financial returns and step away from crypto? Because I haven't finished the book yet.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, once I started to think about it, it wasn't that hard of a decision. And this is a great gift that like children give you, because whenever you're like unsure what to do in a situation, you can just ask yourself what you would tell your kid to do, what you would hope that they would do. And so when I was looking at these two options of doubling down on crypto, trying to join a VC firm or a bigger company and going all in and just like committing to the money path, or stepping away and finally fully going after the writing path, I just, I said like, okay, well, what would I tell her to do? Right? Like, what would I hope she would do in the situation? And it was pretty obvious. It was like, no, if it would be a different situation if we were strapped financially and if we only had a month or two of savings and needed to make money. I'm not saying anybody should be financially irresponsible, but candidly, we were in a position where my wife and I could both not work for 5 years and we would still have savings left over at the end of it. And again, it's like, you're never going to be in a much easier situation than that. And so if I'm not stepping away from the money path to go after this other career that I've wanted to do for a long time, I've been afraid to go after, and that I kept telling myself I would come back to once I made more money, like I didn't come back to it the last 3 times. So clearly more money is not the issue. It's like fear or something else. And so, once I started thinking about that more, I was like, well, obviously I should go do this now. And again, the conversation we had there was, we said, okay, we have this crypto money, which is separate from our, our normal investments, our retirement funds, our houses, like our other assets. There's this crypto money over here. And that can basically be like Nat's income for a period while he gets the like full writing career off the ground.
Yeah.
And if the crypto money runs out, then before I've hit, escape velocity with the writing, then I give it up. Like very, very easy, I think, way to like put a deadline on it, in the sense of like, okay, we can cut spending, we can do these other things to like make it last longer. But if I'm having to draw down on that, then I can do that until it runs out. But if it runs out, we're not touching anything else. Like we're not touching our retirement funds. We're not touching our normal investments. We're not like selling a house. We're not doing any of this other stuff. Like you have to set a boundary on how long you kind of like chase this other goal. And again, just like being very aligned on that made the choice, I think, a lot easier. And again, it's like we weren't and aren't really taking a financial risk. It's like, yes, making less money in the short term, but again, can always go get a job. Right?
Yeah, I think this is very similar to people who are doing startup. You're basically making a business plan for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to share with the folks, like, if someone who has been trapped in these kind of golden handcuffs with high 6-figure salary, but they're not fulfilled with their career, how can they plan to just try a little bit, right? And be comfortable with not earning salary for a while. Like I haven't got a salary for almost a year now. And I constantly think in this way, what am I doing? Am I working towards a future I can make something out of it? Like what kind of advice you would give it to people?
I've done a version of this 3 times now, which was like building up savings, doing something, and then using those savings to fund like the next leg of my career. And I think that's a really good way to do it because it lights a fire under your ass. And obviously the normal advice is like, don't quit your day job, like build your other thing on the side. But it's really hard to seriously build something when you're distracted by like the main thing, by like, the job. And again, if you need the money, like don't do this. But if you have savings, it can be worth spending some of them down to get your next thing going. Because, when that thing really starts to take off, it could it could make the amount that you had before kind of a rounding error. My wife did this too, where she was working at Deloitte as a consultant and, was making like a good salary, but really hated the work, was really, really unhappy. And we talked about it, and I was doing Growth Machine, had other stuff. We could afford for her to not make that income for a while, and I said, like, yeah, go for it. Like quit and figure out something you're going to enjoy more. and she quit, and we had this tea business for a while, and that failed, unfortunately. But then when it failed, she got into real estate. And 3 years after she left Deloitte, she made more in 1 year than she would have made in those 3 years if she had stayed at Deloitte, even with the promotions and bonuses and everything. And so
Yeah.
there is this element of like, yeah, those 3 or 4 or 5 years while you play catch up are probably going to suck, are probably going to be really, really tough emotionally. But if you really stick with it, if you're diligent about using your runway and really fully committing to making this work, you can hit that escape velocity from where you were before, especially if you were on a linear trajectory at your job, but you're stepping into something with a potentially exponential trajectory, right? Like if you have a 9 to 5, if you have a normal job, your salary is not going to double from 1 year to the next. I mean, maybe if you get a crazy promotion, if you switch from one company to another, but it's like, it's very rare. Whereas you leave and you start your own thing, or you go into one of these other careers, and like you might make nothing for 3 years and then just blow past it in year 4 or 5 or 6. And Dan Andrews from Tropical MBA has this blog post that I reference all the time called The First 1,000 Days. And it's all about this idea that you should expect it to take 1,000 days for this new thing you've gone off to start doing to replace what you could have made doing the old thing. And so you got to be ready to strap in for 1,000 days, and you need the money to strap in for 1,000 days. Because if you're expecting it to work in 6 months, you're going to have ended up wasting all of that time, because you're not going to get there in 6 months. You're going to have to go back to your job, and then you're going to have lost your job progress as well. So you've got to have the space to make that 3, 4, 5 year commitment if you're going to do it.
This is so good. The 1,000-day rule. I need to remember this.
I love it. It's such a good rule.
Rule. Talking about rules, you have this famous post about 40 lessons from 30 years. If you can pick only 3 from the list to share with people to build a life based on purpose and not just about money, what would it be?
I talked about a couple of them, like, it's never the right time and err on doing things too early, not too late. I mean, I think those are awesome. One that I really like that I come back to a lot is that you can handle a lot more than you think you can. I think what's interesting about humans is just how adaptable we are and how quickly we get used to things. You hear that in the context of hedonic adaptation, right? You buy a fancy new car, and then a few weeks later, like, it's just your car, right? That's kind of the negative version. But there's a positive version of it too, where having a kid seems very scary, and then you have the kid and it's hard and it's challenging, but that just becomes your new baseline. It's not like you're constantly readjusting to that challenge every day. You kind of get used to it, and you adapt, and you figure it out, right? Same thing with like the stress of working for yourself. Like, that's a very scary thing in the beginning. It's like a terrifying change to make. And then you kind of get used to it, and you forget that it was ever scary or stressful. Like putting your work out in the wild, right? Like writing. Right? Somebody asked me this recently, where they were like, does it feel weird to send a newsletter to 45,000 people? And it doesn't. Like, I literally feel nothing. There's not even the tiniest bit of hesitation before I hit send, because I'm just used to it. Like, that sounds really big and scary, and then it's just like, whatever, right? It's or like the first time somebody's mean to you on the internet for something you wrote, that really, really sucks, and it's really, really painful, and then it just doesn't even register anymore.
It also means that your content is reaching a broader set of people that normally you wouldn't encounter with. I got that from YouTube. My first comment I ever got is horrible video. Two words. But thank God I have this. I was like, okay, it's reaching to a larger audience. And then there are other comments combating that comment. I was like, it's so funny to watch.
You get used to things remarkably quickly. The analogy I always like to make here is endurance runners, where if you're somebody who doesn't run, running a mile would be hard for you, right? Running a mile without stopping would be hard. And then, running a mile in under 10 minutes would be hard. But there are people out there who wake up every morning and run 15 miles.
Yeah.
They do a 15-mile run every morning before work. And that is something that every human body is capable of, assuming you don't have muscular degenerative disease or some serious chronic illness, 99.99% of people are physically capable of building up to running 15 miles a day if they commit to it. And you just get used to it. Your body
Yeah.
adapts, your mind adapts. You're capable of handling way more stress, challenge, load, whatever than you think you are. You just have to slowly build up to it. And that recurs in like, I think every part of life. If you're afraid of doing something because it seems hard or it seems challenging or it seems something you wouldn't be able to handle the other side of, you would actually be totally fine on the other side of it. You'd probably get used to it remarkably quickly. And so keeping that in mind, I think, is a very liberating philosophy to have.
Yeah, so top three is do things early rather than late.
Sorry,
Trust,
I only did one.
trust yourself. You can do hard things. I think the other one, no one is thinking about it very much. What
Yeah.
we talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one too. You know, you can probably think of a lot of embarrassing things you've done, but there probably aren't that many embarrassing things other people have done that you think about that often.
Yeah, exactly.
And certainly not that you think about from 5 or 10 years ago, right? Like, and like if when you think about stupid shit other people did in college, you look back on it with kind of like a, oh, haha, whatever. You know, like we were in college. When you look back on stupid shit you did in college, you're like, oh my God, right? Like, what is it? But like nobody else is, you know, hopefully really like thinking about you that way. And I mean,
I
nobody
think
else
so.
is really thinking about you.
I think
So-
it's because we think about ourselves most of the time, but let's say you have 100% of the time you think about yourself, 80%, 90% of yourself, then you only have like 5 to 10% of time to think about others. It's the same.
Yeah, for all of the other people in your life, right?
Yeah.
My friend said something about this, about like alcohol, right? About how people get very self-conscious about, you know, what they do when they've had a bit of alcohol or like what they say and stuff. And I mean, obviously, yeah, people do stupid shit when they're drunk. I'm not saying they don't, but when people are drinking, they're often hyper fixated on themselves. And when you think back to a time that like you were at a party or whatever and everybody was drinking, it's like very hard to remember what anybody else said or what anybody else did because alcohol like hyper inflates the ego. And so you're even more fully consumed with yourself and what you're saying and what you're doing. And that's kind of like one of the downsides of it. But like we're all walking around with some degree of that inflated ego all the time.
Yeah.
And people just aren't thinking about you, even if you're like a big celebrity, even if you're super famous.
How
Like-
often do we think about celebrities unless we're like a diehard fan? Not
Yeah.
even as a diehard fan, I think. It's really interesting. Like now you're focusing fully on writing, and I assume you're going to do it for the next several years at least. Are you thinking that you're going to expand it to other fields by any chance?
Yeah. So, you know, Crypto Confidential stands on its own, and that's my crypto book. I'm not going to be a crypto writer. I would maybe have like one other crypto book in me, like a more technical, like nonfiction guide resource type book instead of a like story driven one. But, you know, there's just so many things that I want to write about and enjoy writing about. And so the next nonfiction book that I'm working on and thinking about is about learning, is about like specifically around teaching yourself these skills, learning how to write on your own or learning programming on your own or learning marketing on your own in a very like diligent, focused, career oriented way, not like a hacky 80-20, you know, pretend you know the skill kind of way. Because that's just a topic I'm very passionate about that I've gotten quite good at. And I think that area hasn't been done very well, unfortunately. But I'm also writing fiction now. So I'm working on a sci-fi novel that I'm editing a draft of at the moment. And I'm hoping that I can publish that sometime early next year. It's kind of the goal right now. And I really love fiction writing. I didn't think that I liked it. I didn't know that I liked it until I started writing Crypto Confidential. And you're reading it, so you know, like it reads like a novel.
Yeah, it's very good. Please make it into a movie or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's fun, it's fast-paced, it's story-driven, and I, you know, the way I was able to make it like that was I had to study fiction writing. I had to study how these fiction authors create these really exciting, thrilling novels. And in studying that, I realized that that's actually a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it. And the nice thing about fiction writing is that you don't need some new idea or some new research or some new like insight to make a book, right? Like nonfiction, it's a little bit more limited in terms of creativity because you need some, you know, non-fictitious thing to base the book on. Whereas with fiction, you could be like, James Patterson has published about 4 novels a year every year for 50 years.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't really do that in nonfiction.
No.
And so if you want to be like, my goal is to be a full-time author, to be a very prolific author, to put out a lot of books and have that be the bulk of my income. I need to be able to write a lot of books. And so being able to do fiction and nonfiction dramatically expands the universe of what I can do. And if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it. But it turns out I enjoy it quite a bit. And so it's nice to have both options in my tool belt.
Yeah. Looking forward to have more books from you. I will be subscribed to all of those.
Thanks.
And looking for the notifications. You can do writing from anywhere in the world, right? I loved your answer to Ali's podcast when he asked you about the choice between Hong Kong or Malaysia. Now that he has moved to Hong Kong, at least for several months. I lived in Hong Kong for 7 years. Before that, I was in the US for my graduate study. I totally agree with you. Like, it's very important to have access to a variety of people when deciding where to go. But now that you've settled in Austin with Cosette and your daughters, do you see you ever will move again now that with a family, even if your work now is very flexible?
I don't want to.
Don't want to.
There's no aspiration to, there's no goal to, there's nowhere else in the US I would want to live right now.
Outside of the US?
Definitely not outside of the US. No.
Oh.
And no offense to places outside of the US, but we're both American citizens. Our families are here.
Easier to
and it's like, US is pretty great. Like, we have our issues, but if I were going to pick countries to be long on over the next 50 years, like, America is still at the top of my list. And so it's hard for me to like even imagine wanting to go somewhere else. Yeah.
Let's do a time travel to, let's say, 20 years later. Your kids will be 20 something. For the work that you're now doing until 20 years later, what do you want your kids to say about you?
I think I'd want them to say that he worked extremely hard, but we were clearly the priority.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's people,
Yeah,
people think that way. A lot of people, especially in the traditional industry, they don't even think about their family then.
Yeah. There's this line that I've heard a few times that I really love, which is like, in 20 years, the only person who will remember how many hours you worked is your children.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think that's really true.
It is true.
And you look at how broken the families are of a lot of like very successful people. And if that's the cost, I don't think it's worth paying.
No.
And there's Cosette and I've talked about this too, where it's like, if we got to a situation where we had to choose between staying in Austin with our current lifestyle, where it's like we can afford to go out to eat and go and get our groceries at the farmer's market and have like a pretty nice larger house close to downtown, and like we have a really great life here. But if we had to choose between maintaining a certain like affluence in our lifestyle or having an additional kid or two, we would pick the kid. We would move, right? Like, we would go somewhere lower cost of living and give up the like richness of our lifestyle to prioritize family. Like, I think, what do people in their 70s, 80s, 90s say matters to them most, or that they wish they put more attention towards, or they wish they prioritized more? And a lot of people say, my kids are my number one priority. I wish I spent more time with them and less time on work. I wish I'd been more present. I wish I'd had another kid. Like, you hear a lot of that. You don't hear as much people saying like, I wish I spent more time on work. Like, I wish I had fewer kids so that I could get further in my career, right? Like, those people are definitely out there, but they're a lot fewer and further between. Yeah. Like, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. Like, and it's worth listening to the people who are at that point, who are at that age. Like, don't think that you know better than the like consensus of the people who are where you're going to be eventually. Like, their take is probably the correct one, and you're probably going to feel something close to that too. Yeah,
that's such a good guiding principle. Is it like the takeaway is work extremely hard and prioritize your family?
Yeah,
I think that's a good place to end. Let's do a lightning round. Are you ready? What's the best and worst career advice you've ever received?
I think the best was that The best investment you can always make is yourself. If you have to choose between investing in index funds or like investing in your career development, buying a house or investing in yourself, or like any of those things, like always invest in yourself first, right?
Yeah.
Like in building your business, in getting healthy, in freeing up the time you need to like get your career stuff in order, because that can pay off in these very powerful exponential ways that investing in like other things never can. I think the worst that I got might have been that if you're not sure what to work on making money. Because
You actually give that advice.
yeah, and it was in the context of entrepreneurship, right? So it was in the context
Um,
of if you want to be an entrepreneur and you're not sure what type of business to focus on whichever business has the highest likelihood of making you a good amount of money quickly. And it's not bad advice per se, but it does have this problem attached to it, which is that if you don't care about the area you're building a business in, it's
yeah.
going to drain you a lot quicker. It's going to be a lot harder to get to that escape point. And you
Yeah.
might get there, but you're not going to be super happy along the way.
And there's other ways you can make more money than trying to start a business just
Yeah,
for the sake of money.
totally. I mean, it's also very risky. If you're not sure what to work on, like find a high paying job and do that until you are sure. Like
Yeah.
don't try to start something that you don't really care about starting, because it's a slog. It's hard work.
Yeah, exactly. Can you share a book or article that you've read recently that had a big impact on you?
The one that comes to mind, I read it a while ago, but I come back to it kind of often, is Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield, which is really powerful if you want to do something like what I'm doing, of like taking a creative job like writing very seriously.
Yeah.
And he's more famous for The War of Art, where he introduced like resistance and fighting productivity or fighting procrastination. But Turning Pro is the second book in that series, and in that one he talks about like how do you go from being an amateur to being a professional. And in writing especially, it's so easy to be an amateur, to be like, oh, I could only write a couple hundred words today, it was just so hard. Or like, oh, I'm gonna do another round of edits on this because like maybe it could be a little bit better. Or oh, I'm gonna write some tweets, or I'm gonna make some Instagram posts today because I need to like do social media. And it's like, no, if you're going to be a professional, if you're going to be a writer, an author, you get your words done every day. It doesn't matter how you feel. You sit down and you get it done.
Yeah.
And you publish on a deadline, and you keep publishing, and you keep putting work out there. This is not a hobby. It's not something you're doing for fun. This is your job. And
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
enjoy your job. You can be fulfilled by it, but you still have to think of it as a job, not this like fun thing that you're doing on the side. And it can be tough to make that switch, especially since it almost always starts as a thing on the side. And a lot of people, when they make the switch, they stop enjoying it. And so it's a scary switch to make. But if you want to pull it off, you've got to make that switch. You've got to turn pro. And I think it's a really good book for giving you that kind of like kick in the pants for taking it seriously.
I know that you're purely enjoying writing, but if it's not writing, like start a new project purely for the joy of it, what would be?
I'd probably build some sort of app, like some sort of SaaS, something programming related. I really enjoy programming. I really enjoy coding. And honestly, I would go build something in crypto. Like I know the space really well. I know how to do a good amount of crypto coding. I know how to do regular coding too. Like I'd go do something in that space. And I'd probably still have fun with it, but I like the writing more.
Right. The closing tradition, you have the question from the previous guest. So his question is, what song you wanted to be played every time you walk into a room?
The song New Noise by Refused. It's the song they play in the TV show The Bear.
Okay.
When stuff is like really picking up and really getting intense. There's this idea from Josh Whiteskin I really like, which is if you want to do really good creative or like deep thinking work, then whenever you arrive somewhere, you should go into it immediately. Don't check your email. Don't respond to messages. Don't look at social media. Like if your job is writing, then as soon as you get to your desk, you should immediately start writing, like zero other things, because you'll have a lot of pent up creativity from not doing the work for a while. And you lose that if you do other things first. And so by immediately diving into your most important work, you can unleash some of that energy, and you'll often like jump straight into that flow. And I really like that New Noise song because it's very intense. I mean, it's like screamo, it's crazy, but it kind of like symbolizes a bit of that energy. It's like, no, you show up and you immediately attack your work. Like you don't delay it at all.
Yeah, get into the flow states right away.
Yeah.
This is super good advice as well. What questions would you like to leave for the next guest?
What's a book you could write but don't want to?
What's a book you could write but don't want to? Tough choice.
Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much, Nat. I really enjoyed this conversation.
me too. Thanks for
Work
having me on.
extremely hard, prioritize family, get into the work
Yeah.
right away. Thank you, Nat.